Welcome everyone under these very special circumstances. I'm glad that Ulrich Schreiber and the rest of the festival have organized it to the International Literature Festival. Welcome to a very special event, in a sense, the birth of a child called I'm Alive, How Children Survived the Wars of a Century. Ich lebe wie Kinder Kriege überstehen ein Jahrhundertporträt. I'm going to introduce my guests that are with us here on this podium and also live with us from Tel Aviv in a second. We only have an hour time. We have a lot in front of us, before us, a few readings, a few interviews. If you're eager to ask some questions, I hope we still have some minutes after we are done with this. Martina Dase is here. She is more or less the mother of this project, celebrating 100 years of the non-governmental organization Save the Children. Martina Dase is the director of the Strategic Communications Unit at Save the Children since 2016. She has been working as a filmmaker before and has been working leading positions at NGOs, other NGOs like Greenpeace and Welthungerhilfe. Welcome, Martina Dase. Thank you for this project.
Sehr schönen guten Abend. Ich freue mich wirklich, dass so viele Leute hier trotz all dieser Umstände gekommen sind. Vielen Dank.
Welcome and thank you very much for coming. I'm going to translate you now. She's happy that
sorry, I have to get used to this.
That every one of you came despite the circumstances. And then, dare I say, the father of this project is photographer Dominic Nahr, sitting there from Switzerland. He's been reporting sort of like the ongoings in the world, mostly crises, since more than 10 years, has been featured in all the most renowned magazines and newspapers of the North American continent, and also in Germany, Time Magazine, the New York Times, National Geographic, Der Spiegel, Stern, Die Zeit. Has been winning a couple of awards and has a very special relationship as a photographer for this project and did all the fantastic photographies. You can also check out his homepage, of course, to find more, dominicnahr.com. Welcome, Dominic Nahr.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Amir Hassan Cheheltan is now in Tehran, and I hope we can see him. Can we see him already? He is an author not only of one of the small texts where he talks about the photography of Dominic Nahr, but also a very renowned Tehran author. His latest work is called The Circle of Literature Lovers. He has been escaping Iran for a couple of years in 1999 and came back and has made himself a name despite the fact that a couple of his novels are banned, but have been translated into German, English, Italian, other languages like Arabic and Hebrew as well. Tehran, City Without a Sky, Tehran, Revolution Street, and The Calligrapher of Isa Fahan are some of his novels. I hope you can hear me and we can see him. Either way, hi and welcome virtually to Tehran, Amir Hassan Cheheltan.
Yeah. Hi. I am very happy to be a part of this program.
We're very happy that we can see you and hear you. Last but not least, sitting over there, also a contributor to this very unique project is Ulrike Charre. You might know her as an actor in over 80 productions for cinema and television she's worked, but also for audiobooks. You might know her work, Werk ohne Autor, Never Look Away from Florian Henkel von Donnersmarck, Im Angesicht des Verbrechens, In the Face of Crime by Dominik Graf. She was nominated for a television award for her film Lösegeld by Stefan Wagner, and has also contributed to this book, and we will read an article that she hasn't written and one that she wrote about the photography of Dominic Nahr. Welcome, Ulrike Charre. Martina Dase, this is a big moment, I think, for you. This project, and also Dominic, of course, has been traveling as an exhibition, not around the globe, but around Europe a little bit. It looks like it's already printed, but in fact it is not. These are not dummies, but very unique specimen of a later production that will come into play. Before we talk about the book and its becoming, maybe we can talk a little bit about Save the Children. It's celebrating its 100th anniversary, and it all started with an image. So maybe for the people in the audience who don't know so much about Save the Children, enlighten us a little bit.
Thank you, Toby. Yes, Save the Children is actually the biggest independent children's rights organization. Sorry. I have to get used to this English session. I'm quite tired also because working on this book was really exhausting over the last weeks and months. This is really the advanced copy, and whenever my English is disappearing, Toby will help me tonight.
I hope so.
So, Save the Children. You know, there are so many NGOs in the world, but there are very, very few that are already 100 years old. And when was that? 100 years ago? 1919, at the end of the First World War. And at the end of the First World War, children were suffering in Germany and in Austria. And an English woman found or saw, by friends who had given it to her, a picture of a starving child in Vienna, and she said, "We cannot tolerate children starving. We have to do something." And this was 1919, and this was the founding moment of Save the Children, and this was because of a photo that she saw. Today, Save the Children is the biggest independent child rights organization that works globally in over 110 countries. And we are everywhere at the front lines where children suffer, either from wars that has been the red line through all our history, or from disasters, natural disasters, or conflict. And when the centenary year came up, we in Germany thought we have to do something special to honor this woman who, as an English lady, helped the enemy's children. And therefore, we said we need to do something that has to do with photos.
We can see here, it's quite hilarious because this is actually a map of the world, but I don't think you can see the continents, can you? No, the continents have vanished, which is great because it's the utopia of a borderless world, but it actually is quite nice because you can see where actually your protagonists are taken from. The really amazing effort, and I understood this only 5 minutes after I got into the book, is that from every century of the 100 years, you found one, I want to call them survivors, including a 105-year-old German survivor of the First World War, to portray them. Here you can see, well, you can imagine where this is all about. We have the Spanish Civil War, we have the First World War, the Second World War, we have Rwanda, we have the Soviet intervention in Afghanistan that we'll talk about. And so we have not exactly all continents, but we have all centuries, and we have protagonists of all ages, of course, ending with an 11th protagonist, which is a baby, if I can already spoiler that. Tell us a little bit about your research. How did you find these people? How did you look for them?
Yeah, so the idea was to find a survivor of every decade of the last 100 years, and I mean, Dominic can support me with that. Originally, we wanted to make a photo book about children living in war zones today. And then in one situation where we came back from Lebanon, we said, and what if we go back in time? What if we go back 100 years? And then we said, well, finding protagonists, witnesses, survivors from every decade will be easy when it is the current time. But how are we going to find somebody who is a survivor of the First World War? And then we said, of course, this person also should have a relation with Save the Children. And this was when it all started, and you know, we first asked those country offices with the current conflicts, like in Syria or in Lebanon or in Nigeria, where conflicts are going on. And then when we went deeper into the past, we said, this is not enough. We need to go to archives. And this was not enough, so we made newspaper appeals to look for witnesses. And actually, the oldest witness that you mentioned, Mr. Karl, he was 105 years old when we met him, but he will turn 107 this month. And, you know, finding him, that was the biggest challenge of this project. And to be honest, we almost gave it up. And then one day, over an appeal in Berliner Zeitung, we had a lady who was a survivor of World War II, and she then mentioned, might you be interested in a survivor of World War I? Und das war die Nadel im Heuhaufen, die wir dann gefunden haben. Yeah, maybe you tell a bit about Mr. Karl.
Yeah. Sorry, is that moving too quickly? Or?
Yeah, maybe we can, or maybe we can go back a little bit to actually go back to Amal and show the first of your amazing images.
Wow.
That is also the cover of this book, and say that it all started actually in a refugee camp in Lebanon, and it is about a refugee from the Syrian war, and her name is Amal, and this is where the story, I think, from what I heard, between the collaboration of you two started. Can you give us a brief introduction about Amal?
Yeah, I'm just maybe a few more steps back. That again, thanks everybody for coming out. So my work kind of revolves around things that happen now. So if they call us sort of firemen, so when something burns, we go, and we really deal with the issues and the conflicts or cases as they are happening in present time. Not a lot of times we look back in time to kind of understand how these things even got to these situations. And I met Martina in Somalia. We were doing a story. I was doing a story about the famine, or the potential famine that was going to happen in 2017, and it was really important that we. It was really important to. It was really important to stop the famine before it even started. And a lot of the work that I've done before was just to preserve stories rather than think about engagement. And then that's how Martina and me met. And really, this is where we were thinking we have to do something for the 100 years. We then had a project in Lebanon where we worked together for a magazine story, and we decided to stay a bit longer and go to the Bekaa Valley to see what we could see, really. No plan. I remember it was, let's just react to what we see, which is very unusual. Mostly in the world we live in journalism, you kind of have an idea what you want, or at least what you're looking for. Here we were open and free, which was really exciting. And that's when we met Amal. So we met her father first and photographed him, and he brought us to his home. And that's where we met his children, and Amal was one of them. And right away there was some sort of reaction. Very shy, timid girl, and then suddenly she just transformed herself in front of the camera. And I think this picture is one of those moments where we would just really see her the way she wanted to be seen, maybe. And it was the instigator to kind of this whole project, that we document survivors of war and people who have been kind of engaged with Save the Children and find out their stories. And here we have a child, but we decided that's not enough. We have to go back in time. And hence what Martina mentioned, we then found Herr Karl, who was one of the early survivors from this kind of conflict.
You said something interesting about your photography. This, I don't want to call it misleading, this image, but it's sort of like a thing you could see on a National Geographic cover as well. Whereas if you look into the book, the amounts of photography, the landscapes you did, and sort of like the snapshots, and also your process of being on the way always, it seems, with the protagonists, is very atypical and sort of like defies a lot of expectations or even cliches about, sort of like Western eyes going into crises. Maybe you can tell a little bit about your technique, and we'll keep that in mind and then compare it to the images we were about to see.
I grew up overseas, so this Western mindset might be a bit different. I'm actually a Swiss Appenzell from like a small town where the houses are too small for me to stand in. But I grew up in Hong Kong, so I've never lived in Europe until recently. So I think I've always been the outsider, looking at the cultures and people around me, always feeling like I should belong. So I think that helps. And for the last 10 years, I lived in Nairobi, and I wanted to be involved in the stories and mostly moved to where I photographed. So I think that helped as well. I don't know. It's thank you again. That was a really nice thing to say as well about the work. Just trying to be close to people and see them level-eyed, with an open heart, and hopefully you get the same thing back. Which I feel like with all the protagonists, I got the same reaction. You don't have to speak much with photography. Sometimes there's a conversation going on with just body language, and this is one of those pictures that kind of identify that.
Mm-hmm. And it's often very visible, or even feasible. Is that spürbar? Feasible? Is that the word? Yeah. In the photography, and also that you don't put your close-up on the people, but you're also very interested in the circumstances or the surroundings. Maybe let's use a little bridge to Ntaki Rutimana. Vanessa Ntaki Rutimana is the protagonist from Rwanda that Ulrike Tschare will talk about, and maybe you can just introduce her, the protagonist Vanessa, a survivor of the Rwanda war, and your collaboration with her, and before Ulrike actually reads the text.
Okay.
If
so,
it's possible.
Yeah, no problem. Like Martina mentioned, we were doing call-outs to find different, I guess, people who have survived the war and had a connection with Save the Children, but sometimes we couldn't do that. It was just not possible. With Vanessa, it was very interesting. So we had a bunch of Polaroids. We had a box full of Polaroids with their names, and if we were lucky, where they were registered in 1995. So we had a location that's very old, and these Polaroids. And we had a lovely lady, Mama Dafi, who had registered children during that time. So she remembered a lot of these children through the Polaroids. We even found somebody she took in, a young boy that she kind of helped find a bed. And through Mama Dafi, we found 3 siblings, one of which is Vanessa. And our idea was, if we find, where is it? Yeah. If we have one, we have 3 chances to find these siblings. And we went to the location where they were registered, and then Mama Dafi went from village to find them. And we didn't just find one, we found all 3. And they looked at the Polaroid that they haven't seen in 25 years, which was pretty incredible. Her story, though, with Vanessa was very challenging, because a lot of the trauma she had seen as a child still was inside of her, and even transferred over to her daughter. You could see a sort of a passing on trauma, because it wasn't quite dealt with yet. She didn't have an education, so she hoped that her child would get an education, but you can definitely feel that there was a lot of still suffering within her. And she, again, similar to Amal, opened herself up to being photographed and kind of stood in front of me quite bare. And I remember this moment that we just saw before with Vanessa standing in the doorway, and that was the picture. Just that was not staged or anything like that. That was just a moment where she looked at me and kind of talked a lot, silently.
One thing that we didn't mention about the concept of the book is there's a series of photographies by you, then there's always a text written by Bertram Job based on interviews by Anna Majumi Kerber. So there is one block of text, and then they ask a guest author. One of them is Ulrike Tschare, others are Ban Ki-moon, no other than Ban Ki-moon, moderator or journalist Inko Zamperoni, Anna Sophie Mutter, to react to your photography. So it's for every protagonist, for every survivor, there's a 3-part sort of like impression. The text, a little text that is just a couple of pages long and not exactly a portrait. Mm-hmm. Then there are the portraits that are also atypical portraits, and then there's a reflection upon the photographies by someone who just saw the pictures. Now, without further ado, and sorry for letting you wait so long, please welcome in reading the text Ulrike Tschare.
Der Krieg kommt in der Nacht. Für Vanessa Ntaki Rutimana war die Kindheit genau in jener Nacht im Sommer 1994 vorbei, als ihre Mutter sie und ihre Geschwister in heller Aufregung weckte. Wir müssen weg, ruft sie. Es ist Krieg. Da draußen töten Menschen andere mit Pangas. Die 5-Jährige weiß, dass man mit den langen Buschmessern Zuckerrohr schneidet. Aber Pangas als Waffen, das versteht sie nicht. Die Mutter bindet Vanessas älterer Schwester, einem Bruder und ihr die Hemdsärmel aneinander, damit sie einander nicht verlieren. Dann rannten wir los, erzählt sie. Seither habe ich meine Mutter nicht mehr gesehen. Am Rande der Straße nach Gisenyi im Nordwesten Ruandas sehen sie Menschen, die angeschossen oder massakriert worden sind und sterben. Aber keiner im Strom der Flüchtenden achtet darauf, so Vanessa. Wir liefen einfach alle weiter. Vanessa und ihre Geschwister leben von dem wenigen, das sie erbetteln können, und bekommen von den Größeren manchmal schluckweise Trinkwasser in die offenen Hände geträufelt, damit sie nicht zu viel aus den unsauberen Flaschen trinken. Die Nächte verbringen sie alle abseits der Straßen, um nicht entdeckt zu werden. Hunderttausende sind damals in Ruanda während der mörderischen 100 Tage zwischen Anfang April und Mitte Juli 1994 auf der Flucht. Die meisten von ihnen sind Tutsi, die von hasserfüllten Hutu gejagt werden. Es sind aber auch gemäßigte Hutu darunter, die sich an den Gewalttaten nicht beteiligen und dadurch selbst zu Opfern werden. Dabei teilen die beiden Ethnien manches miteinander. Beide sprechen einen Bantu-Dialekt, sind überwiegend christlich. Aber schon die deutschen und die belgischen Kolonialherren haben die Tutsi bei der Vergabe politischer Ämter bevorteilt. Und als Präsident Juvenal Habyarimana, ein Hutu, am 6. April 1994 beim Beschuss seines Flugzeugs mutmaßlich von extremen Tutsi getötet wird, entlädt sich die zuvor systematisch geschürte Wut der Hutu in einem Genozid. Je nach Schätzung werden 800.000 bis über 1 Million Tutsi sowie moderate Hutu hingerichtet in nur 3 Monaten. Und die Völkergemeinschaft? UN-Soldaten sind bereits im Land, bleiben aber passiv, da sie kein Mandat erhalten haben, um einzugreifen, und werden schließlich abgezogen. Die Welt schaut tatenlos zu. Umso mehr sind internationale Hilfsorganisationen nach dem Ende des 100-tägigen Mordens gefordert, die Not und das Chaos im Land zu lindern. Das betrifft nicht zuletzt geschätzte 300.000 Kinder, die ohne Eltern auf der Flucht waren, weil diese getötet oder die Familien in dem Chaos auseinandergerissen wurden. Mit anderen Nichtregierungsorganisationen und UN-Organisationen bemüht sich Save the Children, diese Familien wieder zusammenzuführen. Polaroid-Fotos werden an öffentlichen Orten ausgehängt. Suchteams streifen mit spärlichen Informationen durchs Land. Es ist ein Mandat für Sisyphos, aber für die Mitarbeiter ohne Alternative. Ein altes Polaroid. Irgendwann im Jahr 1995 werden auch von Vanessa und ihren Geschwistern Polaroid-Fotos gemacht. Sie sind auf der Flucht in Richtung Kongo an einem improvisierten Infocenter von Save the Children aufgetaucht und haben sich dort registrieren lassen, um so eventuell doch noch ihre Eltern zu finden. Dann werden die Fotos an jene tausende Aktenblätter geklammert, die Save the Children bis heute in Kigali aufbewahrt. Dort fallen sie Jahrzehnte später Davros Mukorevindekwe in die Hände, als sie erneut die alten Ordner sieht. Die Aufnahme von Vanessa zeigt ein ernstes Kind in einem hellblauen, viel zu großen Hemd, das man ihm vermutlich gerade übergestreift hat. Darunter sind der Familienname und das geschätzte Lebensjahr vermerkt. Vanessa war damals zu klein, sie konnte ihr Geburtsdatum nicht angeben. Vielleicht hat die engagierte Sozialarbeiterin, die seit 1995 für Save the Children im Einsatz ist und von allen nur Mama Duffy genannt wird, sogar selbst die Polaroids gemacht und einsortiert. Doch was ist aus diesen Kindern geworden? Was aus dem ernsten Mädchen mit dem übergroßen Herrenhemd? Mama Duffy bemüht ihre Netzwerke. Und dann dauert es nur noch wenige Tage, bis wir in einem Dorf, Bugiashi, vor Vanessa stehen. Eine erwachsene Frau, Ende 20, die längst selber Mutter geworden ist. Und ihre Geschichte nur leise, in stockenden Worten über die Lippen bringt. Damals sind sie und ihre Geschwister nach mehreren Tagesmärschen in einem verlassenen Ort namens Rubona gelandet und dort in ein leerstehendes Haus ohne Türen gezogen. Hier hat sie ein älterer Mann namens Jean Bosco gefunden, dessen Familie ebenfalls auf der Flucht ist. Er hat die Kinder zu sich nach Bugashi genommen und wird von ihnen bald Papa genannt. Wir bekamen Essen und Trinken, konnten uns waschen, erzählt Vanessa. Und wir begannen wieder, wie andere Kinder auszusehen. So schöpften wir bald neuen Mut.
Vielen Dank, Ulrike Czara. Thank you very much. Maybe we can talk a little bit about what Ulrike just talked about in the text, the work of a non-governmental organization in a government, or maybe versus a government, or in situations where a lot of governments are involved. It's a sort of like a thread that goes through the texts. How do you intervene, or how do you help? How much do you have to work against certain institutionalized forces? How do you get into these countries? How difficult is the work of Save the Children?
The work is difficult on a daily basis, of course. We are in the lucky situation that we are 100 years old. Therefore, in most countries on the globe, we have been present since decades. And therefore, be it governmental institutions or just the people of the countries, they have a lot of trust in us. Therefore, in a situation, I don't know whether we come to Bangladesh tonight, but when you see the situation of the Rohingya refugees, they came from Myanmar to Bangladesh, we were already in the country not only since 2017, when it all happened, but from the moment the country became independent. And therefore, working together with the United Nations, also with the governments, is always very, very sensitive. It's asking us for a lot of diplomacy. It's also asking us to sometimes be not so outspoken as we would want to be the voices of the children whose rights are violated. Sometimes in the Western world, we think, oh, we need to voice out loud what is going wrong, but then we risk to lose our permits to work in that country. So it's a sensitive evaluation of those circumstances every minute, every day, in every country. And it is always about finding the right balance. And this is also, I think, the spirit of the book, finding a balance between suffering and hope, and joy, and death and living. So that's why we call it I'm Alive.
To build a little segue to Afghanistan and Iran, you ask a very renowned author from Iran to talk about an image, a wonderful image, a landscape image by Dominic Nahr, that is not set in Iran, but that is set in Afghanistan. And I found that quite interesting because I had to sort of like make the connection, and maybe you can tell us a little bit before we are finally seeing Amir Hassan Cheheltan read out his text, why you ask him, or what the connection between Iran and Afghanistan is, and how you did another atypical sort of thing for a book like this.
This book is full of atypical surprises. It is an invitation to a journey of discovery. And in this special case, I have to thank my dear colleague, Aisha Malek-Shahi. She is from Iran, and she is acquainted with Amir Hassan Cheheltan. And it was her idea, and this is also the richness of the book, that so many ideas of so many people are embodied in this book. And in this case, she came up with the idea that there are so many similarities in a street scene, be it in Kabul or in Tehran or anywhere else on this planet. And therefore, we thank her for having made this connection. There are many other stories of how we got guest writers in contact with them, but this is a very personal one.
Mm-hmm. We just had a little explosion of Dominic Nahr's images. Unfortunately, we can't see any at the moment. It would be great before we go to Tehran to see what Amir Hassan Cheheltan is talking about. Can we see him now, maybe, and say hello to him one more time? Mr. Cheheltan, are you there? Can you hear us?
Of course, I can.
Okay, of course you can. Great. We can. Can we see him? Yes, we can see you now. You listened to our conversation, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Can you tell us a little bit about what your first reaction was when you were asked to write about this photography, this street scene that is not actually set in Tehran but in Afghanistan, and what you thought about the sort of like the constructed similarities of these two countries and maybe not so constructed similarities?
Well, it is similar. We have got too many similarities. We are sharing many common things that not only the religion, but the most important and every other issue is the language, that we talk in the same language. And in this particular picture, I found it very similar, especially the traffic jam that in rush hour in Tehran, as it is the case in Kabul, the streets are packed with the cars and it is very difficult to move. And at the same time, we have got the same concerns. We have got the common concerns in these two countries. And Afghanistan for me is not only a neighboring country, but also it is a country that in the past 40 years, I am living in Iran with millions of Afghans. So that's why I feel very close to them.
Mm-hmm. I talked a little bit about your own situation, about the fact that you fled Iran and that some of your novels are actually banned there. What is the situation for you at the moment? What is your stance? Or what is your stand? Yes.
In the past 15 years, I am afraid none of my new novels could be published in original language in Iran. But I have been lucky that during this time they could be translated and published in many countries. But fortunately, my previous works that I have already published before this 15 years period are allowed to be published, of course, like many other books with some censorship. But I am boycotted from the state TV and the state media, but it's not a big issue for me since I am allowed to write, although I'm not able to publish it. And I have got my own passport in my pocket to be able to travel. That's okay.
Can you a little applause here from Berlin, I think. I hope you can hear it.
Yes, I can.
Continents.
Yeah.
And can you, one last question, maybe if I'm allowed to, can you tell us a little bit about other official reasons given? That is it the contents of your novel? Is it the content? Is it certain things that you write about? Is it critiquing a regime, or is it sort of more of a more constructed reason, or are you not given any reasons why certain novels can't be published? Is there a transparency in the censorship?
Well, the point is that two very major elements in literature, which is sex and politics, are not allowed to talk about in the novels, especially in the novels. Although sometimes you might face these issues in some of the translated books, but for the Iranian books, there is a very hard censorship, especially for the novels. And it is not also my books, it is also my characters, because I used to be very active to reorganizing the Iranian Writers Association. This is something that the authorities in Iran doesn't like and didn't like. And I had a very bad experience in 90s, especially, that led to I refused to, or at least to travel for a while to Europe. That was due to the International Parliament of Writers, who support those writers who are facing threatening or some danger or that was why this parliament doesn't exist anymore. Of course, it is dissolved, but At the time, it did exist, and they invited me to Europe. But then, of course, I returned back home. Since then, I am here, although I travel to Europe time to time for some period of time.
Great. Can I quickly just ask the Bildregie hier, kriegen wir das Bild hin, während wir ihn sehen? Kann ich da irgendwie, can we see the image that Mr. Cheheltan is talking about while we see him? Is that possible? That is not it, but we are on the right track. It's a
Old school.
it's a lot of cars, I think I saw it before. It's not that either. Now we're back in Rwanda. And here we have the protagonist he's talking about, and here we have the image. Okay, this is the image that you were asked, Mr. Cheheltan, to talk about or to just look. And I like the concept a lot that these guest authors were asked, without knowing the story behind the protagonist, just to react to Dominic Nahr's series of photography. So if you'd be so kind to read your text in the original language, not the original. Did you write it in English or did you write it in Farsi?
No, I wrote it in Farsi, of course. It is now translated.
Okay, so please don't do it in Farsi, because I don't think too many people will be able to understand it. A few, maybe. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
How similar this street is to the streets of my city. I can't see the occupants of the cars, but I am sure that they resemble my neighbors too. It is not unlikely that they include a young woman breastfeeding her child, or a young man with a bouquet of flowers in his hand on his way to visit his sweetheart. I sense a shade blue, the color of love, in this detail of the photograph. What season might it be there now? No passers-by seem to be wearing summer clothes. But in the distance, the delicate green of the trees catches my eyes. I want to believe that it is in the middle of spring. The lively bustle of this street reinforces my guess. What time of day might it be now? You can tell from the traffic jams and dense traffic that it is either early morning in Kabul, when everyone goes to work or school, or an hour before sunset, when everyone is struggling to get home. But judging from the strength of the light, we can assume that the picture was taken at the beginning of the day. I sense the cheerfulness of dawn in the photo. It is quite likely that in the crowd there are pupils going to school, teachers worried that the heavy traffic might make them late for their classes, and other employees on their way to work. Shopkeepers going to their shops. There are people there. From the picture, it is not clear what kind of goods the street vendors are offering under their colorful parasols. Perhaps it is bread typical of the region, or maybe it is fresh herbs and cheese, or something else to eat. Or maybe there are women there counting out coins or notes and pressing them into the vendors' hands, and then taking their full baskets home with them. But none of this is of any consequence to me. More important than anything else in my eyes is that beautiful image of a young girl under one of these colorful umbrellas, who is in the process of enchanting a shy young vendor. But let me see if, even in a corner of my brain, there is a destructive worry. It could be that, God forbid, just a few moments after the photographer took this picture with his camera, on a corner of this very street, a bomb exploded. Then all of my beautiful visions would vanish in the cloud of smoke and disappear into thin air. And that is why I think that this street is similar to a street in my city or similar to any other street in any other city in the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe we can see a picture of the protagonist or the survivor of this particular war as well. We just saw him. His name is Malayan Nazari. That is him. Maybe we can also, for the audience, get to know his story a little bit, and maybe you can tell us also how you approached him.
That is something for Dominic.
Dominic, bring it on.
Okay, bring it on. Malajan was very interesting. We had a few informations that he might be one that we could meet and interview because he did have a connection with Save the Children. He was, and his family was helped with sort of a watering hole, a borehole, in a camp in Pakistan. But all that was sort of in the past. This man has a lot of presence and is very present in being engaged in his community and in his country. Right when I met him, we sat down, you know, we were preparing and waiting for the tea. He jumped right into his story and talked about his brother and wept right in front of me. And the translator just looked at me and went like, I think you need to start taking pictures. So before we even did the formalities of introducing each other, we dived into his story, and that was, I really felt a connection with him and really cherished the time with him. So his story, like all the others, talk about a war during a decade. So we chose different subjects or protagonists that could speak about one decade and one war. And for him, it was the invasion and the occupation of the Russian forces in Afghanistan, which in the end also brought him to be a fighter when he was 16 after his brother died. He picked up a weapon and began fighting as well. And since then, he's been engaged in helping or fighting for his country and pretty much for his children as well. Here we see also, he has an archive of snapshots from his time being a Mujahideen fighter, which was really a treasure. He actually sent one of his family members back to Pakistan to get it for us before we left. And he hadn't seen those pictures in over 2 decades, or a decade at least. And it was really fun to go with him through all these memories as well. So actually what we were doing is going back into his memories, but a lot of the protagonists we were meeting were also going back into their memories, into their history that they might have not thought about. Even just today, we showed Frau Brix, one of the protagonists from the Second World War, her pictures, and she had actually not seen one of the photographs, which was where she had stayed while she was a child at war. It's the first time she's seen the building again since leaving the site as a child. So we're not only are we going back into their history, but also our protagonists are spending time with going back in their own history as well, like finding this photograph again.
We see the images, not the anti-portraits or portraits of you. Then we see as we just so beautifully saw described or heard described by Mr. Cheheltan, the panoramic views or the landscapes or cityscapes. Then we have the Kontaktabzüge, the negatives also. Maybe talk us a little bit through the process of including these 3. Maybe we have them here as well. Let's see the 3 negatives. Or it's not exactly negatives, but it's
negative.
Well, it's negatives, and then also the pictures of images, sort of like found footage. What? Tell us a little bit about this concept and what it's like as a photographer of your renommée and to photograph photographs. What does that do to you?
Yeah. Shall I jump into this? Okay. So one of the visual languages we had was the idea of the present, so the color. We're all bombarded with images of color every day, so for me, that's the time of now. The black and white images that we have, for me, presented or represented history, the idea of time. Maybe sometimes playing with the idea that this could have been then, or maybe just a few years ago. Even sort of here, we have a page, once you have the book in your hands, where we have an old tank, you know, a negative style from an old tank, and the pictures really could be from a very long time ago, during the Russian invasion, versus right next to it, the picture of the actual now, the actual Gegenwart. And so the language of the work was just to kind of play with time, because we're constantly going back and forth with the different protagonists into different spaces, and the two languages were kind of used to play with that idea as well, that you're never really sure, are you looking at the now or are you looking at history? And the contact sheets kind of really helped that as well, to play a bit more into that mindset. It's nice sometimes not to always have answers, but questions as well, that you can then fall deeper into something. And that's a bit where the visual language or the visual concept went into, that we came up with. Yeah.
Mr. Cheheltan, if you can still listen to us, were you given a picture to talk about, or did you see all the images of Malayan Nazari? And what did you think of them?
I actually saw a few of them, not all of them. Of course, because they asked me to choose one of them to write about. That was why I had a few options. But I chose the one that was very, very similar to the streets of Tehran.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I'm curious. Did you so the backstory is that actually there was a suicide bomb that exploded that day, just a street down from there. And did you know that happened, or did you?
No, I didn't know that fact.
Okay, that's really just gave me goosebumps. Yeah.
It's just what happens.
Yeah. No. Okay. That's just because I did not know that.
No.
That's pretty impressive. So 6 people died and 4 people were injured during the suicide blast that hit just a street down from that area on the same day.
Yeah, that's a bit.
Yeah.
So.
Sad premonition, I guess. How long did you look at the image actually to discover so many details? Was that the author in you that saw all these things? I looked at it and couldn't even find some of the details that you described so beautifully in the image.
Actually, it was so familiar to me because I couldn't realize anything strange in the photo. So everything, all the details of the photographs was actually a part of my daily life. This is what you face in the streets of Tehran, especially during the rush hours. So I didn't have to look at it a long time, although it was in front of me when I was writing about it.
Thank you very much. From Tehran, I want to go back to Berlin actually now. It was my wish to focus a little bit on the gaze that you have. That is not always the gaze of the other. We saw a lot of typical other, also from NGOs. We go to refugee camps in Lebanon. We go to sort of like crisis centers in Africa. There is a certain sort of like cliche rhetoric to it, or there's also a danger to it, if I may say. So you talk about this in the policy of the images. I found it really, really interesting that you go back into Europe, that you go to the Spanish Civil War, and that you go back to Germany twice, and also sort of like mirror yourself and also go back to the birth of actually Save the Children. Tell us a little bit. We talked about her slightly before Ulrike Czarre is coming to the stage to read her own text this time about Evelyn Brix, how you found her. Was that the Berliner Zeitung annonce?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we were really lucky with the Berliner Zeitung. Thank you very much for the help. Yes, we found her through this way. But may I just add something to the thoughts of Dominic and also Amir Hassan. Mm-hmm. The whole concept of the book is not a didactical book. It is an invitation to make your own associations. Therefore, there's not a chronological order in the book. It was clear from the beginning that we start with Amal because she inspired us for the project. But then there was a connection between Amal and her family, who longed to go to Germany. And they wanted they hope to end up in Germany through a special project of the Foreign Office. And then we have Herr Karl, 105 years old at that time, looking on container housing for refugees. And the thought is, that is where Amal and her family could end up when their hopes are fulfilled.
To bring this, sorry to interrupt you, to bring this into context, the 105-year-old survivor of the First World War has an interesting story, as that it so happens that sort of like a container village for newly arrived refugees have been set up in front of his pension home, or his sein Seniorenheim. And so there's this image that I actually wanted to end with, where he's looking down at this, where we have a sort of like a full circle closing in a sort of historically fucked up sense, but still in a very touching context. Yeah.
And Eveline Brix, the lady who survived as a child the Second World War, is not in the book placed right after the Spanish World War and then the Second World War, the order that you might expect, but we find her somewhere in between, in the end, towards the end of the book, and this we did on purpose, to just show that we tell a universal story, that it is affecting every culture, every country, every continent, and Germany, of course, especially. And therefore, we thought we need to have both world wars in the book, included in the book.
Dominic, now you went shopping with her to a garden center, I believe it was, and you sort of like made a triptych for this that Ulrike Czarre will talk about. Maybe we can see the triptych, dieses dreigeteilte Bild. Ich hoffe, das haben wir auch. Not yet.
She didn't like that picture, by the way.
We can just look at the images for a second. Is there another one? That's part of the triptych, right? So
yes, that's 1, 2, 3. I might also explain a little bit here. So when we first met Frau Brix, she was really happy to talk to us, but she didn't want any pictures. So for me, it's a little complicated to make a photo book with our first protagonist not wanting pictures. And slowly but surely, we found ways to convince her to make photographs. One of which was she needed help to carry the Töpfe, the pots from the Baumarkt back. So Anna and me volunteered ourselves to be the carrying mule for her pots. And this is a way we managed to walk with her out of her apartment and to the Baumarkt, and this is how these pictures kind of came about. Now she's very well trained, she's been on television quite a lot, and she's much more open to being photographed.
Okay, you're creating a lot of stars, it seems. Please, I'm just giving the sign that we have to cut this very short, but it would be beautiful actually to end with Ulrike Czarre's very, very personal and own text as someone working in film, looking at this and its cinematic qualities of Eveline Brix. Yeah. Thank you once again, Ulrike Czarre.
Ja, wo die Blumen sind. Was macht eine Folge von 3 Bildern zu einem Triptychon? Früher ist diese Form der bildlichen Darstellung vor allem in einem sakralen Kontext verwendet worden, zum Beispiel für Altarbilder. Die 3 Fotos einer Berliner Seniorin dagegen erzählen mir die sehr alltägliche Geschichte eines Einkaufs. Und trotzdem können sie mich ganz ähnlich berühren. Die alte Dame mit dem vollen weißen Haar hat sich für ihren kleinen Ausflug zurechtgemacht, wie es für Menschen ihrer Generation eine Art Pflicht ist. Sie begibt sich auf eine Mission zur Verschönerung ihres Lebens. Nicht weniger bedeutet es ja, wenn man sich in einem Gartencenter nach neuen Töpfen und Pflanzen umsieht. Und während sie uns an der Haltestelle der Straßenbahn den Rücken zukehrt, hält sie vielleicht ihre Beute in den Händen, um sie zu mustern. Als Schauspielerin sehe ich diese 3 Bilder auch als 3 Szenen, die mir trotz des kurzen Ausschnitts die Eigenheit der Hauptdarstellerin zu verraten scheinen, fast wie im Film. Eine Sequenz, die mich neugierig macht auf das Dahinter und das Davorliegende. Das Anregende und das Schöne haben jedenfalls immer noch einen Stammplatz im vorgerückten Leben dieser Frau. In diesem Sinne wird die Botschaft des Plakats, das sie selbst kaum wahrnimmt, hier zur Devise. 0% Stress, 100% Zufriedenheit. Das trifft unser aller Wunschvorstellungen von einem glücklichen Lebensabend. Der Frau auf den Fotos wäre es nur zu wünschen. Sie hat als junges Mädchen die Schrecken und die Mängel eines Weltkrieges sowie der schweren Jahre danach erlebt, hat sich in der einen wie dann in der anderen wiedervereinten Republik behauptet, ohne die Moral zu verlieren. Denn Moral drückt sich auch in der Art aus, wie jemand die Wohnung verlässt und immer noch schöner machen will, etwa mit Blumen für den Balkon. Die tapfere Eveline, so ihr Name, kommt mir deshalb weder heilig noch profan vor. Sie hat sich nicht nur einen guten Auftritt, sondern auch die Energie und die Zuversicht bewahrt, initiativ zu werden, um etwas für sich selber zu tun. Die Zufriedenheitsprämie, die da so groß beworben wird, dürfte ihr also gar nicht mehr zu nehmen sein. Ganz egal, durch welchen Laden in unserer gemeinsamen Stadt sie gerade streift.
Thank you once again, Ulrike Czarre. Two tiny last questions. Maybe we didn't talk about her story. Actually, we just said she's a survivor of the Second World War. So maybe we can tell, clear this up a little bit, that she's a Vertriebene, actually. Maybe you can tell quickly the story of Evelyn Blix.
No, it's for you.
Quickly, okay. She was a child in Berlin, and as the bombs were falling on the city, a lot of schools closed, a lot of children didn't go back to school, or went to school at all. Some schools stayed open still, and actually Frau Brix still went to school, now realizing later that she was one of the few. Eventually all schools closed, and that's when many children from her circle and Berlin were moved to Bad Littin in Czech Republic. And that's where she stayed and kind of went through the war from a distance. Her big travel back to Germany was pushed through when the Russians started moving towards the camp that they were staying. And that's how she then ended up back in Berlin. And one of the big problems she had, and she keeps saying, is that actually the time away was really, really good. You know, they had a lot of freedom. They played games. They went to school, but it was coming back, which was hard for her. And that's where she had a direct connection with Save the Children due to the severe malnourishment she had and her family had, not really finding any food. She remembered, getting a gift, which was a piece of bread, and she was allowed to eat all of it by herself. So that was a highlight. So it was definitely after the war, where a situation, obviously, as probably many still remember here as well, was extremely difficult, and that's really where she was engaged with NGOs or Save the Children through Spesen, food help. Mm-hmm. One thing is I'd like to say that situation has really moved her to help as well. She keeps giving money to different organizations to support children who are in need of food, because she says she knows how it feels like to get extra food when you don't have much. So it's nice that there's a reaction to her experience as well.
And there's another link to another protagonist, because Eveline Brix, she used to help a family in Berlin which was from Cambodia. Mm-hmm. And then at our ceremony for the anniversary, she met with the Cambodian protagonist of our book. So paths cross and people meet, and altogether the book collects some sort of a global family of survivors of war who have some sort of connection.
Did we still hear you? War das Mikro gerade aus, oder?
Ja, ganz wenig.
Okay, good. Last, very, very lastly, but not leastly, this is not actually in print yet. When will, due to Corona, I think the print of this book was sort of like postponed. There are no specimen for you to buy now. Unfortunately, when will it happen eventually?
When will it happen?
Ja, dein Mikro ist aus, ne? Hallo?
So, yes, it's because the printing house didn't get hold of the paper because of coronavirus, because the paper is supposed to come from Italy, and you know what the situation in Italy was like, and therefore we only get hold of the book by the end of November. So if you are looking for a Christmas present, it could be it.
That's very great. In the background now, as I wish not that we can talk about it any longer, but we see Erich Karl looking at the containers of the refugees that came to Berlin. Sadly enough, it's a situation repeating at the moment where we're discussing in Europe how many refugees from Moria we can take on. So hopefully the situation will change for the better, and Mr. Seehofer and others will take in more people, and you don't have to write another book about Save the Children in 100 years. I want to thank everyone, first of all, for coming digitally with us. Mr. Amir Hassan Cheheltan, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much, author and actor Ulrike Charre, for your beautiful readings. Thank you very much for making this happen. Martina Dase and Dominic Nahr for this wonderful book that I hope we'll all hold in our hands in, well, just a couple of weeks or months. And thank you, Ulrich Schreiber, who I think is still in the audience, the director of this festival, for making this happen. And thanks for coming.
Thank you for inviting us.